A morning walk. A stranger tied to a tree. A cure worth killing for. When Eleanor's dog finds a missing scientist, she uncovers a conspiracy that could save millions, including those with the disease that took her husband. Hit subscribe and comment where you're watching from. The morning sun filtered through the maple trees of Willowbrook, casting dappled shadows across the well-worn trail. Eleanor Prescott adjusted her faded blue cardigan against the early chill as she watched her German shepherd, Max, trot ahead with his nose to the ground. At 68, Eleanor's posture remained remarkably straight, a remnant of her 40 years as a nurse at Willowbrook Memorial. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and laugh lines framed eyes that had seen more than their fair share of both joy and heartache. "Easy, Max," she called, her voice carrying through the Vermont woodland. "These old legs don't move like they used to." Max was a handsome animal, with intelligent amber eyes and a glossy black and tan coat. He'd been Eleanor's faithful companion for 7 years, ever since Sarah had insisted her mother needed protection after Frank's passing. This morning walk was their ritual, a 3-mile loop through the forest preserve that bordered their small town, where maple syrup festivals and fall foliage tours marked the passing seasons. Where everyone still brought casseroles when someone was sick, and the local diner, Mabel's, served the best apple pie in 3 counties. "What is it, boy?" Eleanor asked as Max suddenly froze, ears perked forward. The dog's posture changed instantly, hackles raised, a low growl emanating from deep in his chest. Before Eleanor could grab his leash, Max bolted off the trail, barking frantically. "Max, come back here," Eleanor called, her heart racing as she followed the sound of barking deeper into the woods, past the boundary of the usual hiking paths. The terrain grew rougher, forcing her to navigate exposed roots and fallen branches. "Damn dog is going to be the death of me," she muttered, pushing a branch aside. When she finally caught up, the scene before her stopped her cold. Max stood guard, still barking, beside a man tied to an ancient oak tree. The man's head hung forward, his clothes dirty and torn, his wrists raw from restraints. "Oh my God," Eleanor whispered, rushing forward. Her nurse's training kicked in immediately as she knelt beside him, fingers finding his pulse, weak but present. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man's eyelids fluttered. His face was weathered, framed by disheveled white hair. Despite his condition, there was a dignity about him. "Water," he croaked, his voice barely audible. Eleanor fumbled with her small backpack, retrieving her water bottle. Supporting his head gently, she helped him take small sips. "I'm Eleanor Prescott. What's your name? Who did this to you?" His eyes, a startling shade of blue, seemed confused, unfocused. "Richard," he managed. "I'm Richard." Then his gaze clouded with frustration. "I don't remember how I got here." As Eleanor worked to untie the ropes, nautical knots, she noted with curiosity, her mind raced. In Willowbrook, population 2,743, strangers were rare and secrets even rarer. "I'm going to call for help," she said, pulling out her cell phone. Thanking Providence she had service. "You're safe now. No hospitals." Richard grasped her wrist with surprising strength. "Please. No authorities. You need medical attention. I can't explain why, but please, trust me." His eyes cleared momentarily, locking with hers. "It's a matter of life and death." Eleanor hesitated, 40 years of medical training warring with the inexplicable feeling that this man was in genuine danger, and not just from exposure and dehydration. "My home isn't far," she heard herself saying. "Can you walk with help?" As she helped Richard to his feet, Max watching vigilantly, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this decision, was about to change everything. The morning that had begun so ordinarily had suddenly veered into uncharted territory, and something deep in her bones told her there was no going back. The walk back to Eleanor's craftsman-style home on Maple Street was slow and laborious. Richard leaned heavily against her shoulder, his breathing ragged, while Max circled them protectively. The mid-morning sun now beat down through the canopy, but Richard shivered against her. "Just a little further," Eleanor encouraged, noticing how his legs trembled with each step. "My house is just beyond that bend." "You're very kind," Richard managed between breaths. Taking in a stranger, Eleanor's 2-story home came into view, its wraparound porch adorned with hanging ferns and wind chimes that tinkled in the gentle breeze. The garden burst with late summer blooms, black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers, and the herbs Eleanor had cultivated for decades. "Let's get you inside," she said, guiding him up the porch steps. Once inside, Eleanor settled Richard on her floral sofa and bustled about, gathering supplies with practiced efficiency. Her living room walls were lined with bookshelves and family photographs, a life well documented. A faded wedding portrait, a younger Eleanor in nursing scrubs, a smiling dark-haired woman who shared Eleanor's eyes. "Drink this," she instructed, offering a glass of water with electrolytes mixed in. Slowly now, as she cleaned the abrasions on his wrists with gentle hands, Eleanor studied Richard more carefully. He was tall, probably 6 feet, though age had begun to stoop his shoulders. His clothes, though soiled, were of good quality, khaki pants and a button-down shirt that suggested an academic rather than a laborer. His hands bore no calluses, but there were chemical stains on his fingertips. "I should call the sheriff," Eleanor said, reaching for her phone. "No." Richard's hand shot out, grasping her wrist. "Please, I can't explain everything now, but I'm in danger. If word gets out that I'm here." His voice trailed off, his eyes haunted. Eleanor sat back, crossing her arms. "You're asking a lot of trust from a stranger, Richard." "I know." He met her gaze steadily. "And I wish I could tell you more, but my memory, it's fragmented. I remember my name, that I'm a professor, or was. Botany, ethnopharmacology. But how I ended up in those woods." He shook his head in frustration. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 11, startling them both. Max padded over to the sofa, resting his head on Richard's knee as if he'd known him for years. "Well, Max seems to trust you," Eleanor remarked, her expression softening slightly. "He's usually a better judge of character than I am." The moment was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Eleanor peered through the curtains and sighed. "It's my daughter, Sarah," she explained, tension creeping into her voice. "She drops by unannounced to check on me, as if I'm the one who needs looking after." Moments later, the front door opened, and Sarah Prescott strode in, dressed in a crisp pantsuit that matched her no-nonsense demeanor. At 42, she had her mother's high cheekbones, but her father's dark hair and analytical gaze. She stopped short at the sight of Richard. "Mom." Her voice was sharp with concern. "Who is this?" Eleanor straightened, unconsciously positioning herself between Sarah and Richard. "This is Richard. Max found him in the woods this morning. He was tied to a tree." Sarah's eyes widened, then narrowed. "And you brought him here instead of calling 911 because he needed immediate help," Eleanor replied, her chin lifting with the stubborn tilt that her daughter knew all too well. "Mom, for God's sake," Sarah lowered her voice, pulling Eleanor toward the kitchen. "You can't just bring home a strange man like some stray cat. He could be dangerous. He could be mentally unstable. He's right there and can hear you." Eleanor interrupted. "And he's not dangerous. He's hurt and confused." Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Ever since Dad died, your judgment has been, don't." Eleanor's voice turned to steel. "Don't you dare bring Frank into this." In the awkward silence that followed, Richard cleared his throat. "I understand your concern, Miss Prescott. I wouldn't trust me either. But I assure you, as soon as I'm able, I'll be on my way." Sarah studied him, her attorney's gaze missing nothing. "And where exactly will that be, since you apparently have nowhere else to go?" "Sarah," Eleanor admonished. Richard's face fell, genuine distress washing over his features. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "I can't remember where I live, or if I have family. It's all shadows and fragments." The vulnerability in his voice seemed to give Sarah pause. She looked from Richard to her mother, then sighed heavily. "Mom, can I talk to you?" "Privately." As the two women disappeared into the kitchen, Richard closed his eyes, exhaustion and confusion battling for dominance. Max remained by his side, a warm, steady presence in a world that had suddenly lost all its familiar landmarks. The kitchen of Eleanor's home was a warm, inviting space with copper-bottomed pots hanging from a rack and herbs drying in bundles near the window. A well-worn wooden table, scratched from decades of family meals, dominated the center of the room. It was here that Sarah leaned forward, her voice hushed but intense. "Mom, have you lost your mind? You find a man tied up in the woods, a clear crime scene, and your response is to bring him home like a wounded bird." Sarah's knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the table. Eleanor measured coffee grounds into a filter, her movements deliberate. He was dehydrated, confused, and terrified of going to authorities. As a nurse, former nurse, Sarah interjected. Once a nurse, always a nurse, Eleanor countered, turning to face her daughter. I made a judgment call. Would you rather I left him there? I'd rather you called the sheriff. What if whoever tied him up comes looking for him? Did you think about that? About your safety? Eleanor poured water into the coffee maker and pressed the start button before answering. Of course I did. But something about this situation doesn't add up. Those knots that bound him, they were sailor's knots. Complicated ones. And that's relevant because we're in central Vermont, Sarah. Not exactly sailing country. And his hands, they have chemical stains. He mentioned botany and ethnopharmacology. Sarah's brow furrowed. So he says, and that's supposed to make me feel better about you harboring a potential fugitive? The coffee maker gurgled, filling the kitchen with the rich aroma of dark roast. Eleanor reached for 3 mugs from the cabinet, her movements slowed by arthritis but still graceful. Give him 24 hours, Eleanor proposed. If his memory doesn't improve, or if anything seems suspicious, we'll call Sheriff Bennett. Sarah threw up her hands in exasperation. This isn't negotiable, Mom. You're not responsible for saving everyone who crosses your path. A shadow crossed Eleanor's face. No, just the ones I can. The weight of unspoken history hung between them. Eleanor's decades as an ER nurse, the patients she'd saved and lost, and the one person she couldn't save, her husband, Frank, who'd wasted away from a degenerative condition while Eleanor had watched, helpless despite all her medical knowledge. Fine. Sarah finally relented, her voice softening. 24 hours. But I'm staying here tonight. That's not necessary. It absolutely is. Sarah's tone brooked no argument. I'll sleep in my old room. When they returned to the living room with coffee, Richard was standing at the bookshelf, examining a framed photograph with trembling hands. He startled at their entrance, nearly dropping the frame. I'm sorry, he said quickly, replacing the photo of a younger Eleanor in a lab coat, standing beside a distinguished-looking man with kind eyes and a beard. Something about this seemed familiar. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Sarah, whose suspicion had visibly intensified. That's my late husband, Frank. He was a biochemist at the university in Burlington. Richard's eyes widened slightly. Burlington, Vermont Medical Research Center. Yes, Eleanor confirmed, a strange hope kindling in her chest. Did you know him? Richard pressed his fingers to his temples, frustration evident. I can't grasp it. It's like trying to catch smoke. Convenient, Sarah muttered, earning a sharp look from her mother. Eleanor handed Richard a mug of coffee. Cream or sugar? Black, thank you. He accepted the mug gratefully, his hands still shaking. You're welcome to use our guest bathroom to clean up, Eleanor offered. I can find some of Frank's old clothes for you. Mom, Sarah interjected. Can I speak with you again? Alone? Eleanor sighed. Richard, the bathroom is down the hall, first door on the right. Clean towels are in the cabinet. Once Richard was out of earshot, Sarah hissed. You're giving him Dad's clothes now? They're just gathering dust in the closet. Frank would have wanted them used. By a complete stranger who just happened to recognize Dad from a photo? Don't you find that suspicious? Before Eleanor could respond, the bathroom door opened, and Richard emerged, looking alarmed. Eleanor? I remember something. Something important. Both women turned to him. My research, he said urgently. I was studying a plant, a rare species with extraordinary properties. Something that could help with neural regeneration. There was a breakthrough, and then, his face contorted with effort. Then someone came to my cabin. I remember an argument about land rights. About development versus conservation. What cabin? Sarah demanded. Where? North of here. Near Blackwater Pond. Richard looked to Eleanor for confirmation. Eleanor nodded slowly. There's an old nature preserve by Blackwater. It's been the subject of development debates for years. Nancy Holloway from the town council has been pushing to sell it to resort developers. Nancy, Richard repeated, his face paling. Tall woman, silver hair with a streak of white at the temple. That's her, Eleanor confirmed, watching Richard carefully. Head of the community center and about as warm as a January blizzard. Richard sank into a chair, his expression haunted. I think she might be involved in what happened to me. Sarah snorted in disbelief. Nancy Holloway? The same woman who organizes the Christmas charity drive and runs the Historical Society? You expect us to believe she tied you to a tree and left you to die? I don't expect you to believe anything, Richard replied quietly. I'm just telling you what's coming back to me. The sudden ringing of the doorbell made them all jump. Max, who had been lying quietly at Richard's feet, leapt up with a warning bark. Eleanor moved to the window and peered through the curtains. Her spine stiffened. It's Nancy, she whispered, and she's with Sheriff Bennett. Get to the spare bedroom, Eleanor commanded, her nurse's authority resurfacing. Sarah, take him upstairs. Now. For once, Sarah didn't argue. She gripped Richard's elbow and guided him swiftly toward the staircase at the back of the house. Mom, what are you going to do? She whispered. What I've always done, Eleanor replied, straightening her cardigan. Improvise. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. Eleanor took a deep breath, patted her hair, and plastered on the pleasant smile she'd perfected over decades of dealing with difficult hospital administrators. Coming, she called, her voice cheerful as she opened the door. Nancy, Sheriff Bennett. What a surprise. Nancy Holloway stood on the porch, impeccably dressed in a beige pantsuit, her silver hair styled in a sleek bob with that distinctive white streak at her temple, a genetic quirk she turned into a personal trademark. At 65, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd spent a lifetime ensuring others followed the rules, her rules. Beside her, Sheriff Jim Bennett shifted uncomfortably in his khaki uniform. In his early 50s, with a weathered face and kind eyes, he'd been a year behind Eleanor in high school and had nursed a crush on her ever since. Eleanor, Nancy's smile was tight. We need a word. Of course, come in. Eleanor stepped aside, her heart hammering against her ribs. Can I offer you some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. This isn't a social call, Nancy replied, stepping into the living room with the confidence of someone who sat on every town committee worth mentioning. Her sharp eyes scanned the space, noting the 3 coffee mugs on the table. You have company? Just Sarah, Eleanor said smoothly. She stops by on her lunch break sometimes. Sheriff Bennett cleared his throat. Eleanor, we're actually here about a missing person. A hiker reported finding evidence of foul play near Blackwater Pond early this morning. A disturbed campsite, signs of a struggle. How awful, Eleanor murmured, gesturing for them to sit. But I'm not sure how I can help. Nancy remained standing, her gaze fixed on Eleanor with unsettling intensity. Several witnesses reported seeing you return from your morning walk in quite a state, with a man no one recognized. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat, but her expression remained neutral. Small towns and their observant neighbors. Oh, that must have been my cousin Robert from Albany. He surprised me with a visit, wanted to join me for my walk, but the poor man isn't as fit as he used to be. The trail was a bit much for him. Your cousin, Nancy repeated, skepticism dripping from every syllable. And where is he now? Resting upstairs. The drive and the walk wore him out. Sheriff Bennett looked relieved at this explanation, but Nancy's eyes narrowed. I wasn't aware you had family in Albany. On Frank's side, Eleanor replied smoothly. We haven't been close, but since his retirement, Robert's been trying to reconnect. Upstairs, Sarah pressed her ear to the bedroom door, straining to hear the conversation below. Behind her, Richard sat on the edge of the twin bed, his face ashen. Your mother is protecting me, he whispered. She shouldn't. It's dangerous. Believe me, I agree, Sarah hissed back. But once Mom makes up her mind. She shook her head in frustration. Richard closed his eyes, pressing his fingers to his temples. I'm starting to remember more. The cabin by the pond. I've been living there for months, studying a plant species. Something in the Gesneriaceae family, with remarkable properties for neural regeneration. Sarah's legal mind clicked into gear. Properties valuable enough for someone to want to silence you? Potentially worth millions, if my research proves correct. His eyes snapped open. My notes. There's a hidden compartment in the cabin, beneath the floorboards under the east window. If Nancy is involved, she might be searching for them. Downstairs, the conversation had taken a tense turn. I think I'd like to meet this cousin of yours, Nancy was saying, moving toward the staircase. Eleanor stepped smoothly into her path. As I said, he's resting. Doctor's orders. Robert has a heart condition. Nancy, Sheriff Bennett interjected. We don't have any evidence connecting Eleanor to the incident at Blackwater. Not yet, Nancy replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. But Willowbrook is my town, Jim. I know when something's amiss. The phrase sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. My town. As if Willowbrook were Nancy's personal fiefdom rather than a community. Was there anything else? Eleanor asked, her voice pleasant but firm. I need to start dinner soon. Sheriff Bennett touched Nancy's elbow gently. We should go. Thanks for your time, Eleanor. If you hear anything unusual or see any strangers in the area, give me a call, all right? Nancy didn't budge. One more thing. The Community Center Board is meeting tomorrow to finalize the resort development proposal for the land around Blackwater Pond. Since you've been so vocal in your opposition, I thought you might like to know we've secured a majority vote in favor. The statement was delivered like a victory lap, and Eleanor felt a flare of anger. That land has been a nature preserve for generations, she replied, struggling to keep her voice level. The medicinal plants there will be properly cataloged before construction begins. Nancy cut her off. Progress can't be stopped, Eleanor. Not even by stubborn old nurses with sentimental attachments to weeds. The insult hung in the air between them. Sheriff Bennett looked mortified. Nancy, that's enough, he said quietly. Let's go. As Eleanor closed the door behind them, she caught a glimpse of Nancy's face. Not triumphant, as she'd expected, but worried. Almost afraid. She waited until their car pulled away before calling upstairs. They're gone. Sarah and Richard descended the stairs, tension evident in their postures. She knows, Richard said flatly. Or at least, she suspects. And she's afraid of what I might remember. Eleanor nodded grimly. The development vote is tomorrow. Whatever's happening, it's connected to that land deal. Sarah paced the living room, her legal mind working overtime. We need evidence before we make any accusations, especially against someone as connected as Nancy. My research notes, Richard insisted. Everything's documented there, my findings, my visitors, including Nancy. Eleanor's eyes met Richard's, determination hardening her resolve. Then we need to get to that cabin before she does. Dusk settled over Willowbrook as Eleanor's aging Subaru bumped along the rutted fire road leading to Blackwater Pond. The forest closed in around them, dense with maple and oak trees whose leaves were just beginning to hint at autumn's approach. In the back seat, Max sat alert, ears pricked forward. This is trespassing, Sarah muttered from the passenger seat, her knuckles white on the dashboard as the car bounced through a particularly deep pothole. Braking and entering. Obstruction of justice. I could be disbarred for this. It's not breaking and entering if Richard lives there, Eleanor countered, her eyes fixed on the narrowing path ahead. And we're not obstructing justice, we're pursuing it. Richard leaned forward from the back seat. Just beyond that stand of birches, there should be a small clearing. The cabin materialized like an apparition as they rounded the bend, a modest structure of weathered wood with a metal roof and a small covered porch. It nestled against the hillside as if it had grown there, half hidden by towering pines. In the fading light, it looked peaceful, undisturbed. Wait, Richard said suddenly as Eleanor moved to exit the car. Something's wrong. Eleanor peered through the windshield. It looks quiet. Too quiet, Richard insisted. There should be motion sensor lights. And I always left a lamp burning in the window, a habit from my teaching days. Sarah scanned the surroundings, her legal instincts on high alert. We should leave. Now. No. Richard's voice was firm. My entire life's work is in there. If someone's been here. Eleanor made a swift decision. Sarah, stay in the car with the engine running. Richard and I will check it out. Max comes with us. Before Sarah could protest, Eleanor was out of the car, flashlight in hand, with Max on his leash and Richard close behind. The cabin door was unlocked, the first red flag. Inside, the beam of Eleanor's flashlight revealed chaos. Drawers upended, papers scattered, furniture overturned. The small space reeked of ransacking, but with a methodical precision that spoke of purpose rather than random vandalism. They were looking for something specific, Eleanor whispered. Richard moved through the space with growing agitation, running his hands along bookshelves, checking hiding spots with the familiarity of someone truly at home. The notes aren't in their usual place. Max whined suddenly, pulling toward the east wall. Richard followed, dropping to his knees beside a worn braided rug. He pushed it aside, revealing floorboards that, to Eleanor's eye, looked identical to the others. There, Richard said, pressing on one board that shifted slightly. "Help me lift this." Together, they pried up the board, revealing a small compartment containing a waterproof case. Richard's hands trembled as he extracted it. "This is everything. My research data, samples, journal entries spanning 5 years." He clutched the case to his chest like a precious child. A sound outside, the crunch of tires on gravel, sent them both into high alert. Eleanor extinguished her flashlight and moved to the window, peering cautiously through the dusty glass. A black SUV had pulled up alongside her Subaru. 2 men in dark clothing emerged, approaching Sarah's window. "We need to move," Eleanor whispered urgently. "Someone's confronting Sarah." Richard clutched her arm. "There's a back way, through the utility room. It leads to a trail that circles the pond." They slipped through the tiny bathroom into what had once been a pantry, now converted into a makeshift laboratory with shelves of labeled specimens and basic equipment. A narrow door, nearly invisible against the wood paneling, opened onto a path winding into the darkness. "Max, quiet now," Eleanor commanded softly as they emerged into the cool night air. The German shepherd obeyed instantly, padding silently beside them as they skirted the edge of the property. From their position, they could see Sarah gesturing animatedly through her car window, clearly arguing with the men, whose backs were to the forest. Eleanor recognized one of them, the slim build and distinctive stance of Tyler Johnson, Nancy's 20-something assistant who managed the community center's social media. Sarah's creating a diversion, Eleanor realized. Smart girl. They used the distraction to slip deeper into the woods, following the narrow trail that hugged the shoreline of Blackwater Pond. The water lay still and dark to their right, reflecting fragments of the emerging stars. To their left, the forest grew denser, offering cover. "There's a boathouse about half a mile ahead," Richard whispered as they hurried along. "We can wait there until it's safe." The path grew treacherous in the darkness, roots and rocks threatening to trip them with each step. Eleanor's knee, the one she'd injured skiing 30 years ago, throbbed in protest, but she pushed forward, driven by a mix of adrenaline and stubborn determination. Behind them, shouts erupted from the direction of the cabin, followed by the beams of powerful flashlights sweeping the woods. "They've discovered we were inside," Richard said grimly. "They'll search the main trail first." Eleanor made a swift decision. "Then we don't take the main trail." She pointed toward a barely visible deer path leading up the steep hillside away from the pond. "That way." The climb was brutal, all scrabbling hands and burning lungs, but they pushed onward, Max moving surprisingly nimbly ahead of them. Eleanor's years of early morning hikes paid off as she maintained a steady pace despite her age and the difficult terrain. When they finally paused to catch their breath on a rocky outcropping, the cabin was a distant speck below, surrounded now by 3 vehicles. Flashlight beams crisscrossed the main trail by the pond, but no one had thought to look up the seemingly impassable hillside. "Your daughter," Richard gasped, still clutching the waterproof case. "Is she going to be all right?" Eleanor smiled grimly in the darkness. Sarah clerked for the state prosecutor's office before joining her firm. Those boys have no idea who they're dealing with. She'll talk circles around them until they're dizzy. As if on cue, her cell phone vibrated with a text. "Clear. Meet at Emerson's Bridge. 30 minutes. She's safe," Eleanor confirmed, relief washing through her. "But we need to keep moving." Richard nodded, then winced, pressing a hand to his side. "You're hurt," Eleanor observed, her nurse's eye catching the slight hitch in his breathing. "Just tired," he dismissed. "It's been a while since I fled through the woods in the dark." Eleanor didn't believe him for a second, but now wasn't the time to press. Emerson's Bridge is about 2 miles north. If we follow this ridge, we can circle around and approach it from above. As they resumed their journey, Eleanor caught Richard studying her with a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. "Risking everything for a stranger?" Eleanor's pace didn't falter as she replied, "Because 40 years of nursing taught me one thing. When someone needs help, you help them. Questions come later." What she didn't add was the other reason, the familiar ache that had awakened when Richard mentioned neural regeneration research. The same field that had consumed Frank's final years, as he raced against the degenerative conditions stealing his brilliant mind piece by piece. Some wounds, Eleanor knew, never fully healed. They just scabbed over, waiting for the right moment to break open and bleed anew. Emerson's Bridge spanned a narrow gorge where Blackwater Creek tumbled 30 feet down a series of moss-covered rocks. Built in the 1930s as part of a New Deal project, the stone structure had withstood decades of Vermont winters with stubborn grace, much like Eleanor herself. They approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows of the surrounding hemlocks. The bridge stood empty and silent in the moonlight, no sign of Sarah or anyone else. "We're early," Eleanor whispered, checking her watch. "Let's wait here." They settled behind a large boulder with a clear view of both approaches to the bridge. Max lay at their feet, his dark coat blending with the shadows, only his alert ears betraying his vigilance. Richard carefully opened the waterproof case, removing a leather-bound journal and several USB drives. "Everything's here," he confirmed, relief evident in his voice. 5 years of research, all my findings on the plant species I've been studying. "What exactly is this plant?" Eleanor asked, keeping her voice low. "What makes it worth all this trouble?" Richard hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "It's a previously undocumented variety of St. Paulia, African violet, but with extraordinary properties. I discovered it growing only in this microclimate around Blackwater Pond. The unique soil composition and the specific water chemistry here created the perfect environment for it to develop differently from its relatives." "And it has medicinal properties?" Eleanor prompted. "Beyond anything I've seen in 40 years of botanical research." Richard's voice took on the passionate quality of a true scientist. "The plant produces a compound that, in preliminary tests, shows remarkable ability to repair damaged neural pathways. The implications for treating degenerative neural conditions are astronomical." Eleanor finished, her heart pounding. "Potentially worth billions to pharmaceutical companies." Richard nodded grimly. "And worth destroying to someone who wants this land for a resort development. If the plant is properly documented as an endangered species with significant medical value, the preservation laws would make development impossible." The sound of an approaching car silenced them both. Headlights swept across the bridge as Sarah's Subaru pulled up and parked at the far end. She emerged alone, scanning the darkness anxiously. Eleanor whistled softly, a distinctive 3-note call she'd taught Sarah during childhood camping trips. Sarah's head turned toward their hiding place, visible relief crossing her features. "It's clear," she called softly, "but we don't have much time." They emerged from the shadows and hurried to meet her. Sarah looked disheveled but unharmed, her lawyer's composure slightly frayed at the edges. "Those goons questioned me for 20 minutes, she reported, opening the car doors. "Tyler Johnson and some muscle for hire named Brett. They claimed to be security consultants doing a routine patrol of the Blackwater Development Zone." "Did they threaten you?" Eleanor asked sharply, maternal instinct flaring. "Not directly. They were too smart for that." Sarah's tone was grudgingly respectful. "But the implication was clear. Forget whatever we saw or heard tonight." "Did they follow you?" Richard asked, clutching his research case. "I took precautions." The hint of a satisfied smile played at Sarah's lips. "Stopped by the sheriff's office first. Made a very public appearance asking about permit regulations for the Blackwater area. Made sure Johnson saw me there, talking to Sheriff Bennett for a good 15 minutes." Eleanor felt a surge of pride. "Smart move." Bennett mentioned that Nancy's been making calls all evening, seemed agitated about something. Sarah started the engine. "Whatever's happening, it's accelerating." As they drove back toward town, taking a circuitous route along back roads, Richard opened his journal and extracted several pressed specimens protected between waxed papers. "These are samples of the plant," he explained, holding one up to the dome light. In the dim illumination, Eleanor could see a small violet-like plant with unusual serrated leaves and a deep purple flower. "Beautiful," she murmured, "and exceedingly rare. So far, I've only found it growing in 3 locations around the pond, all within the proposed development zone." Richard carefully returned the specimen to its protective sleeve. "I named it St. Paulia memorii, memory violet, for its neural regenerative properties." The name sent a sharp pain through Eleanor's heart. Memory. The very thing that had slipped away from Frank, piece by precious piece, until he no longer recognized her face or remembered their 40 years together. "This could help people with conditions like what took Frank," she said softly, the realization washing over her like a wave. Richard's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. Potentially, yes. The research is still early, but the results are more promising than anything I've seen in my career. Sarah glanced at her mother, concern evident in her expression. Mom, don't get your hopes up. Even if this plant does what he claims, development and approval for human treatment would take years. I know that, Eleanor replied, her nurse's practicality reasserting itself. But it's still worth fighting for. They fell silent as Sarah navigated the winding country roads. Eleanor's mind raced with possibilities and connections. Nancy's determination to develop the Blackwater area suddenly made more sense. It wasn't just about profits from a resort. If she knew about Richard's research, she might have pharmaceutical interests backing her, entities that would pay handsomely to control such a valuable discovery. We need a safe place to examine these notes properly, Richard said, breaking the silence. And I need to check if my backup samples at the university lab are still secure. The university? Sarah asked. You work at Burlington? Richard's brow furrowed. I did. I think. My memory is still fragmented, but I had laboratory privileges. Dr. Abernathy's department, ethnobotany. Eleanor's breath caught. Marcus Abernathy? Frank's colleague. Yes, Richard confirmed, surprise evident in his voice. You know him? Frank and Marcus worked together for years. Eleanor turned in her seat to face Richard. Marcus came to Frank's funeral. He still sends a Christmas card every year. Sarah shot her mother a warning glance. Let's not jump to conclusions about connections. Burlington isn't that big. Lots of academics know each other. Still, Eleanor persisted, Marcus might be able to help verify Richard's identity and research. And he's trustworthy. Before they could discuss further, headlights appeared behind them, approaching rapidly. We've got company, Sarah announced tensely, accelerating slightly. Black SUV, same as before. The vehicle closed the distance quickly, its high beams flooding their car with harsh light. They must have followed us from the bridge, Richard said, his voice tight with anxiety. No, Sarah disagreed, her eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. They would have caught us sooner. They know where we're headed. How? Eleanor demanded. Sarah's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Mom, where's your phone? Eleanor patted her pockets, a cold realization dawning. I must have dropped it during our climb up from the pond. And they found it, Sarah concluded grimly. With your home address and the contacts. The SUV surged forward suddenly, its bumper nearly touching their rear fender. Sarah's expression hardened as she assessed their options on the narrow country road. Hold on, she warned, downshifting abruptly and taking a sharp turn onto an unmarked dirt road half hidden by overgrowth. The Subaru's all-wheel drive gripped the uneven surface as they bounced and jostled along the forgotten logging trail. The SUV attempted to follow, but struggled with the rougher terrain. Its headlights fell back, bobbing erratically as it navigated the ruts and bumps. Where are we going? Eleanor asked, bracing herself against the dashboard as they jolted over a particularly deep depression. Old Miller Farm, Sarah replied tersely. Dad used to take me fishing at their pond, remember? The place has been abandoned for years, but the access road connects to Route 7 eventually. Eleanor nodded, impressed once again by her daughter's quick thinking. In the back seat, Richard clutched his research case protectively, while Max maintained his balance with the practiced ease of a dog accustomed to adventure. As they burst from the tree line onto the overgrown fields of the Miller property, the moonlight revealed the silhouettes of abandoned farm buildings, a sagging barn, a small farmhouse with broken windows, and the skeletal remains of a silo reaching toward the star-filled sky. Sarah cut the headlights as they approached, navigating by moonlight alone. We'll wait here until they pass, then double back toward town. In the silver-blue illumination, the forgotten farm took on an eerie, timeless quality. Eleanor couldn't help but think it was an appropriate hiding place, one set of ruins sheltering another. Richard, with his fragmented memory and weakened body, herself, with her nurse's hands now gnarled by arthritis and her heart scarred by loss. And somewhere in the darkness behind them, the rare violet that might hold the key to healing what had once been beyond repair. The silence that enveloped them felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Whatever came next, Eleanor knew with bone-deep certainty that they had crossed a threshold tonight. There would be no going back to the quiet routine of her widowhood, Her morning walks with Max, her careful tending of memories like pressed flowers between the pages of her life. For the first time in 15 years, she felt truly alive. The Miller farmhouse stood like a sentinel against the midnight sky, its weathered clapboards silver in the moonlight. Inside, dust motes danced in the beam of Sarah's phone flashlight as they settled in the former kitchen. The furniture was long gone, but the stone fireplace remained intact, a testament to Vermont craftsmanship. "We should be safe here for a few hours," Sarah said, sweeping cobwebs from a window to peer out at the overgrown driveway. No sign of the SUV. Eleanor busied herself creating a makeshift workspace, using an old crate as a table. Her practical nature asserted itself in crisis, a trait that had served her well during decades in emergency medicine. "Richard, let's look at those research notes properly," she suggested. "I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Richard carefully laid out his journal and several folders of data on the improvised surface. In the harsh light of their combined phone flashlights, his face appeared gaunt, the shadows accentuating his exhaustion. "The St. Paulia Memoriae has a unique chemical profile," he explained, pointing to a series of molecular diagrams. "This compound here, I've named it Memoraxin, shows remarkable affinity for damaged neural tissue in laboratory tests." Eleanor leaned closer, her medical training helping her decipher the technical notations. "These are incredible results. The regenerative properties exceed anything currently in pharmaceutical development," Richard confirmed. Initial rodent trials showed a 63% recovery rate in artificially induced neural damage, without significant side effects. Sarah joined them, skepticism evident in her expression. "If this research is legitimate, why haven't we heard about it? Something this groundbreaking would make headlines." Richard's face darkened. "Because I've kept it private. After what happened with my previous research, I wasn't taking any chances." "Previous research?" Eleanor prompted. Richard pressed his fingers to his temples, concentration etched in the lines of his face. 10 years ago, I was working on a different plant compound, a potential treatment for pancreatic cancer. A pharmaceutical company, Nexicor, approached me about partnership. When I refused to give them exclusive rights, my lab mysteriously caught fire. All my samples destroyed, backup data corrupted. The name sent a jolt through Eleanor. Nexicor was one of the companies that refused to fund Frank's research. Said it wasn't commercially viable. Richard nodded grimly. "They're not interested in cures, only treatments that create lifetime customers. A one-time neural regeneration therapy wouldn't fit their business model." "So you went off the grid," Sarah concluded, her legal mind connecting the pieces. "Conducted your research in secret." "With private funding from a former student who'd made a fortune in tech," Richard confirmed. "I legally changed my name, bought the cabin through a shell corporation, and set up a basic lab facility. Only Marcus Abernathy at Burlington knew my location. He provided access to more sophisticated equipment when needed." Eleanor's mind raced. "And Nancy discovered your research somehow." 3 months ago," Richard nodded, turning a page in his journal to reveal a handwritten entry. "She came to the cabin unannounced. Said she was hiking and got lost. I was polite but cautious. The next day, I noticed signs that someone had been through my outdoor specimens while I was away. Then the development proposal for Blackwater Pond suddenly accelerated." Eleanor added, the timeline becoming clear. "Nancy's been pushing it through committees at record speed." "Because she's working with Nexicor," Richard said quietly. "I found their logo on documents she left behind during her second accidental visit. They're backing the resort development as a cover to gain control of the land. And my discovery." A sudden noise outside, the distant crunch of tires on gravel, silenced them all. Max's ears perked up, a low growl rumbling in his throat. Sarah moved swiftly to the window. "Headlights. Coming up the farm road. How did they find us?" Eleanor whispered, helping Richard gather his materials. "GPS in the car maybe," Sarah replied grimly. "Or they know the area well enough to guess where this road leads." They moved quickly through the abandoned house, seeking a rear exit. The back door opened onto an overgrown garden and a path leading toward the dilapidated barn 50 yards away. "There," Sarah pointed. "We can hide in the barn until they're gone." As they hurried across the moonlit yard, Eleanor felt a stab of pain in her knee but pushed forward, adrenaline masking the worst of it. Behind them, car doors slammed, and voices called out, harsh in the night stillness. The barn's massive door hung partially open, its hinges long since rusted. Inside, the space was cavernous and thick with the musty scent of old hay and forgotten harvests. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the roof, creating silvery shafts in the darkness. "Up there," Richard whispered, pointing to a hayloft that ran along one side of the structure. "We'll have a better vantage point." The ladder to the loft was missing several rungs, but still usable. Sarah went first, followed by Richard with the research case. Eleanor urged Max up, the dog scrambling with surprising agility. Before climbing herself, each movement careful and deliberate to avoid noise. From their elevated position, they could see through cracks in the wooden siding as two figures approached the barn, flashlights sweeping across the entrance. Eleanor recognized Tyler Johnson's slim silhouette immediately. The other man was Bollier, moving with the confident stride of someone accustomed to intimidation. "Check the barn," a voice ordered, unmistakably Nancy Holloway's commanding tone. They can't have gone far. A third figure emerged from the shadows near the farmhouse. Nancy herself, dressed incongruously in designer slacks and a cashmere sweater, as if she'd been interrupted at a dinner party rather than orchestrating a chase through abandoned property. "Ma'am, maybe we should call in the sheriff," Tyler suggested, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Say we spotted trespassers on the development property." "Absolutely not," Nancy snapped. "Bennett's already asking too many questions. We handle this ourselves. Find Prescott and that botanist, and get those research materials. Nexicor's representative is arriving tomorrow morning expecting results." Eleanor felt Richard tense beside her. In the dim light, his face had gone ashen. "The woman with Nancy," he whispered urgently. "I remember her now. Dr. Elizabeth Mercer, Nexicor's head of research acquisition. She came to my university lab 10 years ago, before the fire." Below, the burly man entered the barn, his flashlight beam cutting through the dusty air. "Place looks empty," he called out. "Check thoroughly, Brett," Nancy ordered from outside. "The old woman is more resourceful than she looks." Eleanor bristled at the description but remained perfectly still. Max pressed against her side, his training keeping him silent despite his obvious tension. Brett moved deeper into the barn, his flashlight beam sweeping across ancient farm equipment and rotting hay bales. When the light tracked upward toward the hayloft, they pressed themselves flat against the wooden floor, barely breathing. A cell phone rang, the sound startlingly loud in the hushed barn. Brett stepped outside to answer it, his voice dropping to an urgent murmur. Moments later, his voice rose in obvious agitation. "What do you mean she's there? That's impossible. We've been following them since the bridge." A tense conversation followed, too distant to hear clearly. Then Nancy's voice, sharp with fury. "The daughter split off. She's created a diversion. Get back to the car now." The sound of hurried footsteps and car doors slamming was followed by an engine roaring to life. Headlights swept across the barn entrance as the vehicle executed a hasty three-point turn and sped away down the farm road. They waited in tense silence for 10 full minutes before daring to move. "Sarah must have taken my car and led them away from us," Eleanor said, relief and worry battling in her voice. "Smart woman, your daughter," Richard observed. "She's bought us time, but we need to use it wisely." As they descended from the hayloft, Eleanor noticed Richard's increasingly labored breathing and the slight tremor in his hands. "You need rest," she said firmly. "Doctor's orders." He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I haven't been entirely honest with you, Eleanor." "About what?" "The reason I'm so passionate about this research." He paused, steadying himself against a wooden beam. "The neural degeneration I'm studying, I'm not just researching it. I have it. Early stages, but progressing. The same condition that took your husband." The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. The same disease that had stolen Frank's brilliant mind piece by piece. The cruel erosion of memory, personality, and eventually basic function that had reduced a vibrant biochemist to a shell before claiming his life. "How long have you known?" she asked softly. 3 years. The first symptoms were subtle, misplaced words, forgotten appointments. Classic presentation. Richard's voice was clinical, detached, as if discussing someone else's case. "That's when I redirected my research entirely to neural regeneration. It became personal. In that moment, Eleanor understood with perfect clarity why she had been so compelled to help this stranger. It wasn't just her nurse's instinct or her natural compassion. It was a second chance, an opportunity to fight the battle she had lost with Frank. "Then we'd better make sure your research survives," she said with quiet determination. "Because I'm not watching that disease win again." Dawn broke over the Vermont hills, painting the landscape in watercolor washes of pink and gold. Eleanor, Richard, and Max had walked 3 miles along back roads to reach their destination, the modest ranch house on the outskirts of Willowbrook where Marcus Abernathy had retired 5 years earlier. The 78-year-old professor emeritus answered the door in a faded University of Vermont sweatshirt and flannel pajama bottoms, his white beard untrimmed and his eyes widening behind thick glasses. "Richard," he exclaimed, shock evident in his voice. "My God, man, I thought you were—" He stopped abruptly, noticing Eleanor. "Eleanor Prescott? Frank's widow." "Hello, Marcus." Eleanor greeted him, exhaustion evident in her voice. "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced at this hour, but we need your help." Marcus ushered them inside, his small home cluttered with books, scientific journals, and potted plants that occupied every available surface. The space smelled of piped tobacco and fresh coffee, a comforting combination that made Eleanor's tense shoulders relax slightly. "You look terrible, both of you," Marcus observed bluntly, guiding them to his kitchen table. "Sit. Coffee first, explanations second." As he busied himself with mugs and his ancient percolator, Eleanor took the opportunity to study the man. Marcus had aged since Frank's funeral, his shoulders more stooped, his movements slower, but his sharp blue eyes retained their keen intelligence. "I reported you missing 3 days ago," Marcus said to Richard as he set steaming mugs before them. "When you missed our weekly check-in and didn't answer my calls. Sheriff came by, took a statement, but—" He shrugged helplessly. "Small-town politics." Nancy Holloway assured everyone you'd probably just gone on a research trip without telling anyone. Richard clutched his coffee with trembling hands. "Nancy is working with Nexicor, Marcus. She found out about my research and she's trying to destroy it. Or steal it." Marcus's bushy eyebrows shot upward. "Nexicor? Those vultures again?" He turned to Eleanor. "Just like with Frank's work. Same playbook." Eleanor nodded grimly. History repeating itself. Over the next hour, they explained everything. Finding Richard in the woods, the ransacked cabin, the chase, and finally the overheard conversation at the Miller farm confirming Nancy's collaboration with the pharmaceutical giant. Marcus listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly absorbing the information with the practiced patience of a career scientist. When they finished, he rose and moved to a cluttered desk in the corner of his living room, extracting a key from a hidden compartment. "Richard gave me this 6 months ago," he explained, returning to the table. "It opens a safety deposit box at First National with backup samples and research data. He was concerned something might happen." "Paranoia serves a scientist well these days," Richard remarked dryly. "There's more," Marcus continued, his expression grave. 2 weeks ago, a woman came to see me, claimed to be from the university's development office, asking about promising research that might attract donors. She was particularly interested in botanists working on medicinal plants. "Asked specifically about you, Richard." "Description?" Eleanor asked. "Tall, expensively dressed, mid-40s. Dark hair with premature gray at the temples." "Elizabeth Mercer," Richard confirmed. "Nexicor's research acquisition director." Marcus nodded. "I played dumb, of course. Said you'd retired to Arizona or some such nonsense. But they're closing in, Richard, and with Nancy Holloway involved." He shook his head grimly. "That woman has this town in her pocket. Has for decades." Eleanor's phone buzzed. Sarah, using their emergency code to indicate she was safe but couldn't talk. Relief washed through her. "What's the next move?" Marcus asked, scientist pragmatism taking over. "The development vote is today, and if Nancy succeeds, the land will be cleared within weeks." Richard opened his case, extracting a USB drive. "This contains everything. My complete research, test results, specimen locations. Enough to file for endangered species protection and potentially a patent on the Memaraxin compound. We need to get this to someone with authority," Eleanor said. "Someone beyond Nancy's influence. I have a former student at the EPA regional office in Boston Marcus offered. She specializes in habitat protection for medicinal plant species. If we can get her this data today. Nancy mentioned a Nexicor representative arriving this morning. Richard reminded them. They'll be moving quickly. Eleanor's nursing experience kicked in as she noticed Richard's increasing pallor and the fine tremor in his hands. You need medication and rest, she said firmly. When did you last take your prescriptions? They were at the cabin, Richard admitted. 3 days ago. Marcus rose immediately. I'll call Dr. Patterson. He can write emergency scripts without questions. And you both need to clean up before anyone sees you. You look like fugitives. We are fugitives, Eleanor pointed out with a wry smile. While Marcus made calls, Eleanor helped Richard to the bathroom where he could shower and change into some of Marcus's clothes. As she waited in the hallway, her gaze fell on a framed photograph on the wall, a younger Marcus and Frank standing in a laboratory, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning widely. A third man stood with them, his face partially turned away from the camera. When Richard emerged, looking marginally better in fresh clothes though still worryingly pale, Eleanor pointed to the photo. Is that you? With Frank and Marcus? Richard studied the image, his expression softening. Yes. Burlington University, 1989. We were all working on different aspects of plant-derived pharmaceuticals. Frank in processing methods, Marcus in identification, me in field research. You knew my husband, Eleanor said softly. That's why the photograph in my living room seemed familiar to you. Richard nodded slowly. I'm starting to remember more. Frank and I collaborated occasionally. He was brilliant, dedicated. When his diagnosis came, he trailed off, pain crossing his features. You were at the funeral, Eleanor realized suddenly. Back row left side. You signed the guest book as R.J. Stevens. I remember because I didn't recognize the name, but Marcus greeted you like an old friend. Richard James Stevens was my birth name, he confirmed. I legally changed it to Richard Jensen after the Nexicor incident, part of my disappearing act. The pieces were falling into place, connections forming like a complex chemical reaction. Eleanor felt a surge of something between fate and purpose. Frank would want us to finish this, she said firmly. Marcus returned, his expression triumphant. Dr. Patterson will have prescriptions waiting at the pharmacy. My EPA contact is driving up from Boston. She'll be here by noon. And I've called in a few more reinforcements. Reinforcements? Eleanor questioned. Former colleagues from the university's environmental science department. People beyond Nancy's influence who can testify to the scientific significance of Richard's discovery. Marcus's eyes twinkled with long-dormant academic rebellion. Nancy has the town council in her pocket, but she's about to discover that retired scientists with nothing to lose can be formidable opponents. A knock at the door made them all freeze. Marcus peered through the peephole, then relaxed, opening it to reveal Sarah, disheveled but unharmed, her lawyer's composure firmly back in place. Mom, she exclaimed, embracing Eleanor tightly. Thank God you're safe. How did you find us? Eleanor asked. Process of elimination, Sarah replied with a hint of pride. I led those goons on a wild goose chase halfway to Burlington before losing them at a truck stop. Then I figured you'd head to Dr. Abernathy's. It was the logical safe haven. She nodded a greeting to Marcus before turning to Richard, her expression serious. I've been making calls to colleagues in environmental law. If your research is as groundbreaking as you claim, we have multiple avenues to block the development: endangered species protection, medical research preservation, possibly even historical indigenous plant use designation. Richard's face lit with hope for the first time since they'd found him. The samples and data in the safety deposit box should provide everything we need. Then let's move quickly, Sarah said, her litigation mode fully engaged. The town council meeting starts at 2 o'clock. Nancy's presenting the final development proposal for approval. Eleanor watched the rapid transformation of their situation, from desperate fugitives to a coordinated team with purpose and resources. The familiar energy of a crisis response team coming together reminded her of her best days in the ER. I need to go home first, she said decisively. Change clothes, check on Max. I refuse to face Nancy Holloway looking like I've spent the night in a barn. Sarah's expression grew concerned. Mom, they might be watching your house. Let them watch, Eleanor replied, a steely glint in her eye. I'm done running. It's time to take this fight public. Marcus chuckled appreciatively. Frank always said you were the backbone of the family, Eleanor. Said you had more courage in your little finger than most people have in their entire body. The mention of Frank strengthened Eleanor's resolve. This wasn't just about saving Richard's research or protecting a rare plant. It was about finishing something Frank had started, challenging the system that had deemed his work unprofitable and therefore unworthy. Sarah, take Richard to the bank when it opens, she instructed. Get those backup materials. Marcus, coordinate with your EPA contact and colleagues. I'll meet you all at the town hall before the meeting. And what will you be doing? Sarah asked skeptically. Eleanor's smile was reminiscent of her emergency room days, calm, determined, and slightly intimidating. I'm going to have a conversation with Sheriff Bennett, she said. It's time he understood exactly what kind of criminal activity Nancy Holloway has been orchestrating in his jurisdiction. As they finalized their plans, Eleanor felt more alive than she had in 15 years. The nurse who had fought countless medical battles, the wife who had watched helplessly as disease claimed her husband, the widow who had retreated into the quiet rhythms of small-town life. All these versions of herself were converging now into something new and powerful. Nancy Holloway was about to discover that dismissing Eleanor Prescott as just a stubborn old nurse had been a serious miscalculation. Sheriff Jim Bennett's office smelled of coffee and gun oil, a combination Eleanor had always found oddly comforting. The man himself sat behind his desk, hat removed to reveal thinning hair, his expression cycling through surprise, concern, and finally grim understanding as Eleanor laid out the events of the past 24 hours. That's quite a story, Eleanor, he said when she finished, leaning back in his creaking chair. Abduction, corporate espionage, trespassing, harassment, all orchestrated by the head of our town council. I know how it sounds, Jim, Eleanor acknowledged. She'd changed into a crisp blue blouse and sensible slacks, her silver hair neatly styled, armor of respectability. But you've known me for 40 years. Have you ever known me to invent wild tales? Bennett sighed, rubbing his jaw. No, that was always Patty Morrison's department, not yours. He referred to their high school's notorious gossip, drawing a small smile from Eleanor despite the circumstances. Nancy has too much power in this town, Eleanor continued. She's been using it to push through this development deal because she's working with Nexicor Pharmaceuticals. They want to destroy a potentially groundbreaking medical discovery to protect their profit margins. Bennett's eyes narrowed. I've noticed she's been insistent about this Blackwater project, calling in favors, pressuring council members. But corporate conspiracy? That's a big leap, Eleanor. Eleanor reached into her purse and extracted a USB drive, a copy of Richard's research data that Marcus had quickly duplicated. Everything's here, Jim. The research, the plant specimens, documentation of Nancy's visits to Richard's cabin, and a record of threatening incidents. There's also a photo of Nancy meeting with Elizabeth Mercer of Nexicor 3 weeks ago at the Burlington Hilton. Marcus's EPA friend pulled that from the hotel's public lobby camera. Bennett took the drive reluctantly. You know I need more than circumstantial evidence to move against someone like Nancy Holloway. Which is why I brought this. Eleanor produced a small recorder. Last night at the Miller farm, we overheard Nancy explicitly directing her associates to find Richard and seize his research for Nexicor. She mentioned the representative by name. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. You recorded her without consent? Vermont is a one-party consent state, Eleanor replied calmly. Sarah confirmed the legality. A ghost of a smile touched Bennett's lips. You always did do your homework, Eleanor. He inserted the drive into his computer and clicked through several files, his expression growing increasingly serious. This plant, it really could help people with neural degeneration? Like the condition that took Frank, Eleanor confirmed softly, and the same one that's now affecting Richard. Bennett was silent for a long moment, staring at the screen. Eleanor knew he was thinking of his own father, who had suffered from a similar condition before passing 5 years earlier. The development vote is at 2, she reminded him gently. Bennett checked his watch. That gives me 3 hours to verify some of these claims. Not much time. It's all we have. The sheriff stood, reaching for his hat. I'll look into this immediately. But Eleanor, stay away from Nancy until I've had a chance to investigate. The woman's backed into a corner, and that makes her dangerous. I'm not exactly defenseless, Jim, Eleanor replied, rising to her feet with dignity. I've survived worse than Nancy Holloway. As she turned to leave, Bennett called after her. Eleanor, for what it's worth, Frank would be proud of what you're doing. The words touched something deep within her, a wound that had never fully healed. I couldn't save him, she said quietly. But maybe this research can help others. Outside the sheriff's office, Eleanor checked her phone to find messages from both Sarah and Marcus confirming their progress. The bank had released Richard's safety deposit box without issue, and Marcus's academic colleagues were gathering at the town hall with prepared statements about the scientific significance of the discovery. Eleanor's next stop was the Willowbrook Gazette, where her old friend Diane Harper had been editor for 20 years. If they were taking this public, they needed the local press on their side. The Gazette occupied a modest storefront on Main Street, its windows plastered with local event flyers and community announcements. Inside, the small newsroom hummed with the energy of an impending deadline. Diane looked up from her computer, reading glasses perched on her nose, her face lighting with pleasure at the sight of Eleanor. At 63, she remained sharp as a tack, her journalist's instincts undimmed by small-town politics. Eleanor Prescott, as I live and breathe, what brings you to my humble domain? She rose to embrace her friend, then pulled back, scrutinizing Eleanor's face. You've got that look. The one you used to get when you were about to raise hell with hospital administration. I need your help, Dee. Eleanor said simply. It's time to break a real story in Willowbrook. Over the next half hour, Eleanor outlined the situation, watching as Diane's expression shifted from skepticism to journalistic hunger. By the time she finished, Diane was already typing furiously. Corporate corruption, medical breakthroughs, environmental destruction, small-town politics. This has everything, Diane muttered, fingers flying across the keyboard. I can have a preliminary piece ready for the online edition within the hour. The question is, are you prepared for the blowback? Nancy has a lot of friends in this town. She has a lot of people who fear her, Eleanor corrected. That's different from friendship. Diane paused her typing, fixing Eleanor with a knowing look. This is about Frank, isn't it? About finishing what he started. Eleanor hadn't expected the direct hit, and it took her a moment to compose herself. Partly, she admitted. But it's also about doing what's right. About not letting power and money silence the truth again. Diane nodded, satisfied. That's the Eleanor I know. Now, I'll need statements from Richard and Marcus. And any documentation you can share that won't compromise legal proceedings. As they worked through the details, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emergency. Meet at Marcus's ASAP. Dread settled in Eleanor's stomach. I have to go, she told Diane abruptly. Something's wrong. She hurried the 3 blocks to her car, dialing Sarah's number repeatedly with no answer. The drive to Marcus's house took 7 minutes, the longest 7 minutes of Eleanor's recent life. When she arrived, Sarah's car was parked haphazardly in the driveway, the front door of the house standing ajar. Eleanor approached cautiously, every nerve on high alert. Sarah, she called, pushing the door open wider. Marcus? Richard? The living room was in disarray. Books knocked from shelves, papers scattered across the floor. Marcus sat in his armchair, a bloodied tissue pressed to his forehead, while Sarah paced frantically, phone to her ear. What happened? Eleanor demanded, rushing to check Marcus's injury, a superficial cut, already clotting. They took him, Sarah reported grimly, ending her call. 2 men forced their way in about 20 minutes ago. They were specifically after Richard and his research materials. Nancy's goons? Eleanor asked, her hands automatically checking Marcus for other injuries. No, Marcus replied, his voice shaking with anger. These weren't local muscle. They were professionals, corporate security types. One of them mentioned Dr. Mercer by name. Nexicor, Eleanor breathed. They're cutting Nancy out of the loop, making their own move. Sarah nodded tensely. They were efficient, knew exactly what they wanted. They took Richard, his case, and all the materials we'd retrieved from the safety deposit box. Did they say where they were taking him? Eleanor asked, her nurse's training keeping her voice calm despite the panic rising within her. Not explicitly, Marcus said, but they mentioned meeting their transport at the private airfield outside Burlington. Eleanor's mind raced. The small executive airport served the corporate visitors to the area, a perfect extraction point, far from commercial airport security. Sheriff Bennett, she said decisively, reaching for her phone. He can intercept them before. Already called him, Sarah interrupted. He's heading there with deputies. but it's a 30-minute drive from Willowbrook. They have a head start. Eleanor's gaze fell on the scattered papers, a plan forming. The town council meeting is in 40 minutes. Nancy will be there, expecting her development approval to sail through. Mom, Richard is the priority now, Sarah argued. We need to focus on stopping Nexicor from taking him out of state. We're doing both, Eleanor replied, a fierce determination hardening her voice. Bennett is handling the extraction team. We're going to make sure Nancy doesn't get what she wants in the meantime. Marcus struggled to his feet. I'm coming too. My colleagues are already gathering at town hall. You need medical attention, Eleanor protested. What I need, Marcus replied with surprising steel, is to see Nancy Holloway's face when her little empire comes crashing down around her ears. Frank would never forgive me if I missed that. The mention of Frank strengthened Eleanor's resolve. She helped Marcus to her car, while Sarah gathered the remaining research documents that Nexicor's men had overlooked in their haste. As they drove toward town hall, Eleanor's phone rang. Sheriff Bennett. We've set up a roadblock on Route 7 heading toward the airfield, he reported without preamble. State police are assisting. We'll intercept them, Eleanor. And Richard? He needs his medication. He could be in serious distress by now. I have an ambulance on standby, Bennett assured her. We'll take care of him. As Eleanor ended the call, she caught Sarah watching her with an expression of newfound respect. What? Eleanor asked. Nothing, Sarah replied with a small smile. Just remembering something Dad used to say about you. That beneath all that practical nursing efficiency beat the heart of a revolutionary. Eleanor felt a bittersweet pang. Your father had a romantic streak a mile wide. He wasn't wrong, though, Sarah observed as they pulled into the town hall parking lot, already filling with cars. Look what you've started. The scene before them was unexpected. At least 30 people had gathered on the town hall steps, many holding hastily made signs protesting the Blackwater development. Eleanor recognized Marcus's academic colleagues, but also neighbors, former patients, and members of the local environmental group Frank had once led. Word had spread faster than Eleanor had anticipated. Diane Harper stood among the crowd, notebook in hand, documenting the impromptu protest. As Eleanor helped Marcus from the car, a ripple of recognition passed through the gathering. Someone began to applaud, and others joined in, the sound swelling to fill the autumn air. Eleanor felt a curious lightness in her chest, a sensation she recognized, after a moment's confusion, as hope. Not the desperate hope she'd clung to during Frank's illness, but something sturdier, built on community and shared purpose. Inside the town hall, council members were already taking their seats at the elevated dais, expressions ranging from confusion to concern as the noise from outside filtered through the historic building's walls. Nancy Holloway sat in the center chair, elegantly dressed in a burgundy suit, her composure intact but her eyes darting nervously toward the entrance. Eleanor, Sarah, and Marcus made their way to the front row, joined quickly by Diane and several professors clutching research papers and environmental impact statements. Nancy's gaze locked with Eleanor's across the room, recognition and then cold fury crossing her features. She leaned to whisper something to her assistant, who hurried from the room, phone already in hand. She's realizing her Nexicor allies have gone rogue, Marcus murmured. Watch her squirm. As the meeting was called to order, Eleanor's phone vibrated with a text from Sheriff Bennett. Vehicle intercepted. Richard safe. Evidence secured. En route to hospital for evaluation. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, relief washing through her. When she opened them, she found Nancy staring at her, a question in her expression. Eleanor allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. The game was over. Nancy just didn't know it yet. The Willowbrook Town Council meeting began with its usual formalities, pledge of allegiance, roll call, approval of previous minutes. But the tension in the air was palpable. The public seating area had filled to capacity, with additional residents standing along the walls, many wearing hastily made badges reading, Save Blackwater Pond, that Diane's assistant had distributed. Nancy Holloway maintained her composure, moving efficiently through the agenda items, her voice steady despite the occasional tremor in her hands. When she finally reached the Blackwater development proposal, a hush fell over the room. Item 7, Nancy announced, shuffling papers before her. Final approval of the Blackwater Resort Development Plan. The Planning Commission has reviewed all environmental assessments and finds no impediments to proceeding. I move that we, Madam Chairwoman, Eleanor interrupted, rising to her feet. I request permission to address the council before this vote. Nancy's smile was glacial. Public comment period closed last week, Mrs. Prescott. The council has already heard community input on this matter. This concerns new information, Eleanor persisted. Information vital to the council's decision. Council member George Winters, owner of the local hardware store and a lifelong friend of Frank's, leaned forward. I'd like to hear what Mrs. Prescott has to say, Chairwoman. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the other council members. Nancy's knuckles whitened around her gavel, but she nodded stiffly. 3 minutes, Mrs. Prescott. This is a courtesy, not a right. Eleanor moved to the public podium, her nurse's posture impeccable as she faced the council. The speech she'd mentally prepared on the drive over seemed inadequate now, so she abandoned it, opting instead for the direct approach she'd always preferred. The Blackwater Pond area contains a previously undocumented plant species with extraordinary medicinal properties, she began. Research conducted by Dr. Richard Jensen, formerly of Burlington University, demonstrates that this plant produces compounds capable of regenerating damaged neural tissue, potentially revolutionizing treatment for conditions like the one that took my husband, Frank. She gestured to Marcus, who approached with a folder of documents. Dr. Marcus Abernathy, Professor Emeritus of Ethnobotany, has verified these findings, along with colleagues from the Environmental Sciences Department. The research has been submitted to the EPA for emergency habitat protection consideration. Nancy's face had paled, but she rallied quickly. This is absurd. No such research has been presented to the Planning Commission. We can't delay a multi-million-dollar development based on unsubstantiated claims about some weed. Eleanor met her gaze steadily. The research wasn't presented because Dr. Jensen was abducted and tied to a tree 3 days ago, left to die in the very forest your resort plans to bulldoze. When that failed, your associates attempted to steal his research materials. Fortunately, Sheriff Bennett has intercepted those individuals and recovered the evidence. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Nancy's composed facade cracked visibly. These are outrageous accusations. You have no proof of any of this. Actually, Sheriff Bennett's voice rang out as he entered through the side door. We have quite a bit of proof, Nancy. He moved to stand beside Eleanor, his uniform adding official weight to the proceedings. My deputies have arrested 2 men employed by Nexicor Pharmaceuticals' Corporate Security Division. They've already implicated you in a conspiracy to suppress DR. Jensen's research and fast-track this development to destroy the natural habitat of a potentially valuable medicinal plant. Nancy surged to her feet. This is preposterous. Jim, you're exceeding your authority based on the delusions of a bitter widow and a discredited scientist. That's enough, Nancy, Bennett replied evenly. We have recordings of you directing your associates to find Dr. Jensen and seize his research. We have financial records showing Nexicor funneling money through your Historic Preservation Foundation. And we have Dr. Mercer of Nexicor currently giving a statement at the State Police Barracks, detailing your arrangement. As if on cue, the council chamber doors opened, and Richard entered, supported by a deputy. Though pale and moving gingerly, he stood tall, his eyes finding Eleanor's across the room. The relief that washed through her was so intense, she gripped the podium for support. Nancy's gaze darted frantically around the room, seeking allies and finding none. The council members had drawn back from her, physical distance reflecting their desire for political separation from what was clearly becoming a scandal. This meeting is adjourned, she declared, banging her gavel. We'll reconvene when these ridiculous accusations have been properly investigated. Point of order, George Winters called out. We still have a quorum, and this matter requires immediate attention. I move that we table the Blackwater development proposal indefinitely, pending full environmental and scientific review of Dr. Jensen's findings. Second, another council member quickly added, You can't do this, Nancy hissed, but her authority was already evaporating. The vote proceeded, with all members except Nancy voting to table the development. As Nancy gathered her papers with shaking hands, Sheriff Bennett approached her. Nancy Holloway, I need you to come with me to answer some questions regarding your involvement in the abduction of Dr. Jensen and the attempted theft of his research materials. The woman who had ruled Willowbrook with an iron grip for decades seemed to diminish before their eyes. "I want my lawyer," she said stiffly, allowing Bennett to escort her from the chamber. The room erupted in conversation as they departed, residents surging forward to congratulate Eleanor and question Richard. Marcus beamed proudly, holding court with his academic colleagues who were already discussing research possibilities. Sarah squeezed her mother's hand. "You did it, Mom. You actually did it." Eleanor shook her head. "We did it. All of us." She made her way through the crowd to Richard, who stood somewhat unsteadily, but with unmistakable relief on his face. "Eleanor," he said warmly, taking her hands in his. "Sheriff Bennett told me what you've done, all of it. I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," she replied. "Just promise me one thing, that you'll continue your research, that you'll finish what you started." His eyes, clearer now with proper medication, held hers. "I promise. And I'd like you to be part of it, if you're willing. Your nursing experience, combined with your knowledge of Frank's case, it would be invaluable." The offer caught her by surprise. "I'm retired, Richard. Have been for years." "So was I," he replied with a small smile. "Until a stubborn nurse and her German shepherd refused to let me disappear into the woods." 8 months later, a gentle spring rain pattered against the greenhouse roof as Eleanor carefully recorded measurements in a logbook. Around her, dozens of St. Paulia memoriae thrived in specialized growing containers, their distinctive purple blooms bright against the verdant foliage. The research facility, funded by a combination of university grants, private donations, and a significant settlement from Nexicor, occupied the former Miller Farm, now transformed into a botanical research station. The old farmhouse had been renovated into offices and living quarters, while state-of-the-art greenhouses spread across what had once been fallow fields. Richard entered, leaning less heavily on his cane these days. The experimental treatment derived from the memory violet had shown promising results in his case. Not a cure, but a significant slowing of progression and even some reversal of symptoms. "The latest test results came in," he announced, his eyes bright with excitement. "The modified compound is showing an 82% efficacy rate in the lab trials. Marcus thinks we'll be ready for expanded human testing by fall." Eleanor felt the familiar surge of hope, stronger now, more grounded in science than desperate wishes. "Frank would be amazed at how far we've come." "He'd be prouder still of you," Richard said gently. "This wouldn't exist without your courage, Eleanor." Outside the greenhouse, Max barked playfully, chasing Sarah's children who visited the research station every Sunday. The German shepherd had become something of a mascot for the project, his picture prominently displayed in the visitor center that educated the public about medicinal plants and conservation. Nancy Holloway had pled guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony against Nexicor executives. The corporation faced significant fines and restructuring, while the town of Willowbrook had elected George Winters as its new council chair, with a platform centered on sustainable development and environmental protection. Eleanor moved to the greenhouse door, watching as her grandchildren played beneath the maple trees she'd once walked under with Max on that fateful morning. The forest beyond stood protected now, a permanent conservation area ensuring the memory violet would continue to grow wild alongside the carefully cultivated specimens in the research facility. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when I found you tied to that tree, I never imagined we'd end up here." Richard joined her at the door, his shoulder brushing hers companionably. The best discoveries often come from unexpected beginnings. Eleanor smiled, feeling the truth of those words settled deep in her bones. At 68, she had found a second chapter she never anticipated. Not just purpose, but community, connection, and the satisfaction of continuing Frank's legacy while creating something new. Max bounded up the greenhouse steps, tail wagging, ready for his afternoon walk. Some routines remained unchanged, even as everything else had transformed. Eleanor clipped on his leash, exchanged her lab coat for a light jacket, and stepped out into the spring air. The path ahead wound through the awakening forest, dappled with sunlight filtering through fresh green leaves. Eleanor walked forward with steady steps, Max at her side and the future, uncertain but full of possibility, stretching before them. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and if you've watched this far, comment, "I watched till here," and share your opinion about this story. Oh, And don't forget to watch the next video that appears in the end screen. It's very exciting.